We'll start the January 3rd Planning Commission meeting. And first order of business is the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Alrighty. Next order is to adopt the agenda. Does anybody have anything to add, or should we just go with it?
I'll make a motion that we go with it.
All right.
And I second that we go with it.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Approval of the Planning Commission meeting minutes from November 1st.
Just had one extra word, I think, that wasn't probably necessary in the
On last page?
last page.
Yep.
Last sentence. Tingly and answered. I think we can do without the and.
Yep, perfect, thanks.
Unless you had something else you were trying to say.
Nope.
I wanted to add to it.
Did anybody have anything else? Okay.
Well, in the, back on page 2, second to last paragraph, it talked about that Mark had answered a question that I had, and made some comments in response to a question I had. Should the question be included in there, or do you think the answer at the beginning is enough to cover it?
Because the question
Yeah.
was, where are we going to find
Yeah.
Yeah,
all
yeah.
of the?
We have to have growth. Where are we gonna put it?
Yeah. I think it kind of captures that in there, but I can change it. Either way, I can change it.
Okay.
No, it just seemed odd that you answered a question
Yeah.
before it was asked.
Yeah.
but
Sure.
Makes sense.
We're so good.
Concise.
Yes. Anything else? Okay. Entertain a motion to approve.
I make a motion to approve.
A second?
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. So we have two public hearings. The first one has to do with the text amendment with definitions of some of our zoning ordinances to add definitions related to breweries, brew pubs, tap rooms, micro distilleries, and tasting rooms, which is why I guess all of you are here. And so what we usually do is staff goes through kind of an explanation. We'll open up the meeting. You all can say something if you would like to and answer our questions. And then we'll close that one and then go on.
Honorable Chair, Commissioners, so the two items that are on the agenda tonight go hand in hand. The city received an application for a brewery to be located in the former MPFC existing building. As a result of that, staff had discussions internally with staff and the city attorney talking about our current ordinance and how it's set up to essentially accommodate the proposed use. And we talked about some of the changes in laws associated with licensing of and then just production of certain types of alcohol surrounding breweries, tap rooms, distilleries, micro distilleries. And with that conversation, we thought it would be prudent for the city to consider, if it were to consider the brewery that's being proposed, it would be a good idea at the same time for the city to just go ahead and amend its ordinance to define some of these uses that are somewhat unique, and then amend the ordinance then to require that these uses come in under a conditional use, and ultimately that's up to the Planning Commission and Council to make that determination. But we thought it was a good idea to visit this subject at the same time. And so with that, the first item is a proposed text amendment to the city zoning ordinance The first being definitions, to add several definitions to the city's zoning ordinance that would include breweries, brew pubs, tap rooms, micro distilleries, and tasting rooms. And then secondly, within Chapter 153 of the city zoning ordinance, to provide additional detail pertaining to whether these would be permitted or conditional uses within various zoning districts of the city, and then to have that discussion. So within that, the definitions that the city has outlined would provide the city with just some closer definition for very kind of micro industry based uses. And these are all uses that have come up, I think, in the last maybe 15 years or so.
Yeah.
But brew pub, a small brewery that operates a restaurant on the same premise as the brewery, whose malt liquor production is regulated by Minnesota statute. So the amount of production in these facilities is regulated by Minnesota statute. We don't want to change that. We just want to defer to Minnesota statute, whatever it is they allow. But these definitions coincide with Minnesota statute. Microdistillery, a facility that produces ethyl alcohol, hydrated oxide of ethyl, spirits of wine, whiskey, rum, brandy, gin, or other distilled spirits, including mixtures thereof, for the non-industrial use to not exceed 40,000 proof gallons per calendar year. That one is actually specified and that's the standard. I don't know that it's going to change, but again, we looked at these as kind of these are standards now that most cities are adopting. Our city attorney also looked at these and recommended the same. Small brewery, a brewery that produces no more than 20,000 barrels of malt liquor in a calendar year. A tap room, an area for the on-sale consumption of malt liquor produced by the brewer for consumption on the premises or adjacent to one brewery location owned by the brewer. May also include sales for off-premises consumption of malt liquor produced at the brewery location or adjacent to the tap room and owned by the brewer of the off-premises consumption. Package subject to, and then it again references state statute. Tasting room distillery, an area for on-sale consumption of distilled spirits on the premise of or adjacent to one distillery and in common ownership with the producer of the distilled spirits. And so those are the kind of prevalent or prevailing definitions that we've been looking at for this craft industry of spirits, distilleries, brew pubs, or breweries. And I think it's important to define each of these out, as the city at some point may want to more closely distinguish locations for where these facilities can be located. So for example, something that's very common in the industry as it relates to a small brewery or a small brewery with a tap room would be to be located in an industrial area that otherwise wouldn't allow for retail type sales. But you see a lot of these breweries or breweries with tap rooms going into areas of cities that have buildings that are conducive to the type of equipment needed to do that or have this. And so a lot of cities then are providing these definitions, and then they're looking at areas beyond just say like a central business district or what would otherwise be a commercial retail district, and saying, well, what if we have a heavy industrial district? Would we allow a brewery / tap room or something like that? Just as reference, the city had a brewer, and I'm not 100% sure because this is very recent, looking at leasing a space in our industrial park for the purpose of producing but not selling. So this would be an off-site brewery for a business that they have, and they actually have a tap room in St. Paul, and they were looking for industrial space. So, and we asked them, well, are you thinking about opening a tap room or anything similar? And they said, no, we're just a brewery. So they fall into an industrial definition, but if they would have said, yeah, we might be interested in that, we don't really define it out, and then we don't have any way to make it a conditional use or anything like that. Similarly, when we were talking about this type of use that came in, without changing our ordinance, this use could still come in under a under a restaurant bar. It would be considered similar. They're serving food, and alcohol similar to other restaurant bars we have in this city. So we could have just said, no, let's not deal with the ordinance amendments, but we just thought more proactively at this time it'd be good to define these things out a little bit further. And then if there was a need, either now or in the future, for the city to start to differentiate certain uses in different parts of the city, we could do that. So with that, we are proposing to make these, or incorporate these definitions into Chapter 153 of our city zoning ordinance. And then with those definitions in place, we're able to then take and modify the permitted or conditional uses within each of those various districts. And so you can see what is being proposed by staff, whether or not that's what the planning commission agrees to, but just as a overall, we're proposing that conditional uses, or that all of the uses identified would be a conditional use, all of those uses in the MUG, MUB, and MUD. So all of our mixed use districts within the city would accommodate, I'm sorry, not all uses, small breweries and brew pubs only with a tap room. Micro distilleries operating in conjunction with a tasting room and tap rooms, or tasting rooms in conjunction with a small brewery or micro distillery, would be a conditional use in the industrial zoning district. Meaning we'd allow any of those uses in the industrial district as a conditional use. Only small breweries and brew pubs with a tap room in the mixed use districts. So we then in the language incorporate conditional uses and then small breweries and brew pubs, and then we say within just those for just those particular uses, must have a tap room, must demonstrate adequate parking, must demonstrate that it will not negatively impact traffic, and then all permits and licensing must be approved before operation of the business. And then the building shall not be located within 200 feet of the property zoned R1 or R2 unless approved as a part of a master plan. And then the city may reduce separation requirements if the following is provided: landscaping and berming parking lots placed away from residential parcels, and a lighting plan that complies with applicable standards. Now, I included that language primarily because we have that relating to other uses that are similar in the city's ordinance. And so right now in the ordinance, the one that we have is the most closely relates is taverns, private clubs, and lodges. That's different than restaurants. And within the definition of restaurants, we don't distinguish with alcohol, without alcohol, or anything like that. We just have a definition. We just have restaurants listed without a definition. So this would at least define these uses out more closely. And then within that, within the ordinance that relates to taverns, private clubs, lodges, under conditional uses, we have the same kind of separation language, and then we have the same landscaping, berming, lighting, parking language. And I left it, I modified it a little bit, but I didn't make it wholly different. It's something we could make wholly different if we wanted to, and then change the taverns, lodges, clubs section. But one of the things that the tavern, lodges, clubs was getting at was separation from residential use. I changed that to say separation from residentially zoned property. And one of the things that I think of is you can have residential use within a downtown business district. It would be awfully prohibitive to keep separation from those uses. Our ordinances, ours, the way we've zoned the city, the mixed use districts are transition districts, and they are gonna change, and I don't know how you'd have them change if you had to continually essentially look at residential as going to be residential forever. But there is, potentially then conflict, but we've kind of established that by the way we've zoned the mixed use districts already. So I know I covered a lot of stuff in that little bit. It is fairly simple what we're trying to do, which is one, just include some definitions that we think are important to have in our ordinance, knowing that this industry continues to grow, knowing that we've had other requests historically in the city relating to this. And so kind of proactively just define these different types of uses. And then secondly, within our ordinance, talk about where they go. Now, we took what I would think would, what I thought was more of a conservative approach, and staff talked about it in what we're proposing, and that is to just make them all conditional uses, so that there isn't a permitted use by right, which gives the city kind of a checks and balances to be able to go in and see what are the impacts of a
Yeah.
specific use on a specific property as it relates to other properties, and then are the impacts able to be adequately mitigated, so.
Okay.
So with that, I'd go back to you for questions or comment or whatever else.
Let's open the public hearing at 6:18. Do you, or whoever, anybody, did you have something you wanted to say or just answer questions, or how do you want to do that?
This is just regard to the ordinance. Most of the gentlemen here tonight are for the use,
Yeah.
the specific use
Okay.
that's being proposed more so than the ordinance. And the ordinance is not coming through as an application of the applicant, it's coming through as a
Us.
city-driven,
Yeah. Okay.
proposed change.
Okay. Well, one of the questions that I had on page 6, considering that I was a little confused on letter H, where it says council shall either approve or deny application by a 2/3 vote of the full city council. I thought that was gone.
So that's under the conditions for granting a conditional use, and it did just get changed,
Mhm.
but the ordinance hasn't been codified yet, so it
So
just.
yes, it is changed. The code book is just not updated. So yes, this, as of right now.
That will change.
This is majority.
Well, it has changed, it's just not in the
Yes.
book yet,
Yep.
so when I
Okay.
cut
So
and
it is,
paste.
for this, it will be effective
right.
as majority,
Okay,
yes.
all right. Because I don't think we need to go backwards.
No.
No, and so, yeah, and unfortunately, as I put the conditions for granting a conditional use permit, which applies to the next requirement, that hasn't, yeah.
Can you explain a little bit more about putting something like this in the industrial district? When you said that, somebody they would make it, but then not sell it, how do they make money? I mean.
Okay, so
Transfer.
what I've seen a lot, and you guys have seen this in the industry too, a lot of the breweries and or distilleries are being located in industrial parks because the buildings in the industrial parks are conducive to the tall equipment
That's-
needed.
okay.
And so and it's cheap space. And it also goes along with the kind of the feel, look, culture of a lot of the different brew pubs. So if you go to a lot of cities, they have these breweries or tap rooms or distilleries located in industrial zoning districts. And so what we're saying is, in the ordinance, we think we should accommodate what would be a small brewery or brew pub, which is more the retail side.
Yeah,
Only if they have a tap room, meaning it's not just a brewery like industrial brewery, as a conditional use in the mixed use district. But then in the industrial zoning district, which we have 2 fairly decent sized industrial
Yeah.
parks in the city,
Yes.
we would allow in those districts the distilleries, the tap rooms, small breweries or micro distilleries with tap rooms, all of those uses within the industrial zoning district, but again, as a conditional use. So they'd have to come through the city, we'd have to make sure that it was compatible, it fit, they had parking, all of the
Okay.
various things that we would look at, but they
but
would
there
be.
could be retail in there.
We'd
have to-
allow
we'd have to
all
look.
of it, all of the
Okay.
above. So, but the one, and I'll have to look up. I don't know. Does anybody know if that one went in? Anybody from? You don't think the one went into the industrial park? Well, so there was right before the holidays. We had a space in one of our industrial parks that was being looked at by a brewery, but it was being looked at by a brewery for simply production.
Okay.
Is that currently allowed now?
Yes.
It would be, as
They
just a
want-
permitted use. Now, they didn't, that's why we were asking them, do you want a tap room
We tried-
associated with that? Because that would change. They wouldn't be permitted then, the way that we're set up now. But if you guys saw the space that they were looking at, where it is, where it's situated, a tap room would be what I would think would be kind of complementary to the use there, and probably would be non-impactful given the location and the proximity to anything really. There's nothing around it, but so just kind of addressing it, we're saying that the industrial park could be a place where we would permit this use as well as our mixed-use zoning districts. But it's solely up to the city on land use as to where and what we permit and how we permit it, whether it's conditional or permitted.
Okay.
I have some reservations about that, but I think the fact that you would require a conditional use permit would allow the city to look at those nuisance type things or parking situations and traffic and all of that, to see if it would be compatible or not. So I guess in my opinion, as long as it does go through that process, it's something that we can manage. It really kind of depends situation by situation, depending on, you know, the building itself and the parking and layout of the streets and traffic flow. I mean, obviously, might be some conflict with other vehicles, big trucks and so forth, that all needs to be put down.
Yeah, parking it to me is one of the largest issues with those because you can draw a pretty significant crowd. I mean, these breweries are wildly popular. The good thing about the industrial parks that I've typically seen is that industrial park business hours are 7 to 4, and brewery peak hours are typically 4 to
True.
10. So a lot of times they're actually complementary uses in the sense that you can utilize parking and other stuff that
Sure.
is otherwise, sitting vacant half of the day. But a lot of the industrial areas were not set up to accommodate this kind of retail parking,
Yeah.
right? So they're set up to accommodate a warehouse with a small office, which is
Yeah.
very limited typically in parking. So that's why you'd have to really closely understand parking.
Yeah.
But
Okay. Any other questions from the group or comments?
How soon can we open?
Yeah. Keep jumping ahead.
Well, I would, I'm not opposed to putting the text amendment in, or recommending it to the city, to the council, to add the definitions. I feel a little better about the industrial district thing was kind of like, what? Hello?
It-
But that helped.
yeah,
Are the definitions pretty much verbatim from
They're
state
boilerplate.
statute? Okay.
Yeah.
That's what I kinda thought.
yeah, we didn't make these up
Yeah.
as much
Which is
as I.
probably
Yeah,
good.
well
I'd like to
done.
say they're
I was about to
good, but
congratulate you, but-
they were, these are very, very standardized
Standard,
definitions. And then these definitions correlate to Minnesota statute as it relates to how these facilities are licensed and taxed is essentially what happens to them.
Right.
Because they're different than a bar, or they're different than other restaurants and things of that nature, so.
Okay.
I guess I have two other things to raise for discussion. That would be in the downtown area. These places are quite popular and a lot of cars and so forth. I'm just wondering if downtown, if there's enough space for such such an establishment with all the parking and traffic that goes on. Certainly seems very conducive for the Gateway and Bud mixed-use areas,
Yeah.
but and I think conceptually, I'm fine with it in downtown, but I'm just worried a little bit about the size and the amount of traffic given the, layout of the streets and the size of our downtown area.
Yeah, once you get in there, there isn't a lot of parking.
I think the proof of parking is gonna be the biggest issue we have. We haven't had a business come into our downtown area, the MU downtown, recently enough that we've done a parking analysis on the whole area. But I think you would, I can tell you, I've had conversations in the last 5 years with people who have looked at one of the Quonset buildings there for a brewery because it's got the right ceiling height. And then the other one is our our downtown redevelopment project has a spot for something, whether it's a brewery or a restaurant or a bar or something, there's a spot there. So I would say as long as we're conditional use, we have the ability to say that you don't have adequate parking. The other thing is, you'll notice in those conditions that I added to the conditional use permit structure, it says parking must demonstrate will not negatively affect traffic to surrounding intersections and must demonstrate adequate parking to accommodate the use. So those are direct conditions of the conditional use, so we'd have to have proof of parking in order to accommodate. I do agree with your general comment, but again, on a case-by-case basis, you know, maybe a small brewery with a small tap room makes really good sense, or maybe when we hopefully redevelop our downtown block here shortly, we put in enough on-street parking that could accommodate some shared use. But, yeah, I mean, these are gonna function really similar to our bars, right? And,
Right.
you know, you drive over there now, I just drove through there, I did a really quick count at McGarry's, I mean, there's 35 on-street parking, there's cars parked. Nobody else has a business there that's working right now, so those all had to be
Yeah.
Thursday night at McGarry's,
Yeah.
right? So 35 on a pretty small space, so,
Yeah.
yeah.
Another
The other one was on the 200 feet to, between
Oh.
building and zone residential. How do we feel about that distance?
Between,
So-
what is MPFC and that, I mean, even the,
I'm thinking more about
Houses-
downtown, I think, than
that,
Gateway.
yeah.
So the downtown's an interesting one because almost all of the houses in downtown on the north side of the railroad tracks are zoned mixed use,
Yeah.
meaning that
Right.
there wouldn't be a separation required from those. If you were to say locate in an industrial district and right across the street was residential, you'd have to have that 200 feet of separation. I don't know the origination of the 200 feet, but I thought about it when I was putting this back on paper because I was taking it out of the existing ordinance, and I thought it's not a terrible distance, but it is a pretty good separation. So you couldn't pick a parcel that was right up against, and I think that goes to just mitigation of noise and things like
Yeah.
that, traffic associated. But if you think about the site that we're gonna look at tonight, the nearest property zoned residential is gonna be on the other side of Main Street. Even though there's houses on, Main Street that are on the south side, they are not zoned residential, they're zoned mixed-use gateway.
Ah, that's right.
So, and then the public comment we got on this from the housing development behind the bank, again, wouldn't be applicable from a separation standpoint because that's zone mixed-use gateway. That's our mixed-use zoning. Even though it's residential use and it's housing, it's zoned mixed use. And I think that's the distinction that I was trying to make versus actual use of a property. I think it'd be really hard to regulate. You know, we've got one house and then we've got 3 businesses and then we got one house, but you couldn't put certain businesses in that. I think that's gonna be really hard to administer for the city, but
How close are those homes behind the bank to the MPFC building?
to the MPFC. We'll find out really quick. You're gonna just have to
or even the,
look at what I was looking at here.
the
Earlier.
apartment building.
Oops. Okay, I'm going too far. Let's just look really quick at the MPFC. I didn't do that math. It's probably about 200 feet.
Most of the activity is going to be.
375,
Yeah.
Okay,
So
just as an example, I mean, that's what that is.
about the same to the apartments.
yeah.
Yeah, now if you look at those apartments, from there to there is about 320.
Okay.
But again, this whole block, all of these homes are zoned mixed use.
Yeah. Well, and we've had conversations before about if you put something in where you're kind of excluding everything, then what's the point?
Yeah, I think it would be hard. I do think the separation from a residential zoning district would just prohibit somebody being on an edge and it being in a really close situation. But again, even in our ordinance, we say must be 200, but it could be reduced. But then we're saying 200 is kind of the base, and then anything beyond that, you could do more berming, landscaping. You know, there's other mitigating factors. We're just saying, we're saying that it's not that you can't do it, but then we're going to really look at it a lot closer. But I do think having just some buffer number in there.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know if we'll run into. We'll probably run into it next week now, but I would think that having something in there is better than just leaving it totally
Right.
subjective.
Oh, I agree. I was just wondering
Yeah.
if we felt like 200 was,
Yeah, maybe 200, maybe it's 300. That number only came from the existing ordinance as related to the clubs, lodges, and tavern.
yeah, no, it makes sense
Yeah.
to be consistent.
Yeah.
Yeah. Other questions? Okay, then I would entertain that we recommend that the city,
We, Madam Chair, that the hearing's still open?
oh, it is.
Yeah, if you
Thank
close the public
Let's
hearing.
close the hearing at 6:34.
4.
Thank you. Okay, so we need a motion to recommend to the city council that we put the new definitions in and change the wording regarding multiple use, et cetera, those kinds of things. I need a motion.
I'll make that motion.
Yeah,
Are you seconding?
I am.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Excellent, okay. So then we move on to, did that cover A and B?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Like I need to be confused anymore.
No,
I already
no,
am.
you're good. We did both the definitions and the amendment to the land uses, so
Okay.
we should be good.
So what we're doing now is Todd Murley and Maple Plain Gateway Properties, I imagine, are looking to, for the following actions. Site plan review for a new brew pub to be located in a portion of the former grocery store, and conditional use permit to allow a brew pub in the mixed-use gateway zoning district.
Thank you. Honorable Chair, Commissioners, so this item obviously goes hand in hand with what we just discussed. There's two things that are required when a new commercial business comes in, or there's a change in commercial business uses within the city. One, or the first thing, is site plan review. We require a site plan review for all change in uses or new uses that come into our commercial zoning districts. And then with the language we just talked about, recommending approval to the council on, this particular use would then be defined as a brew pub, and as a brew pub would be a conditional use in the mixed-use gateway zoning district. And so we're making an assumption that the council would also approve in the same order, the ordinance and then the conditional use permit.
Okay.
With that, the lion's share of the discussion revolves typically around the site plan, but in this case also the conditional use permit. As with conditional use permits, the city has criteria for granting conditional uses that are outlined in the ordinance. This particular use, I'll just give a little background history. The current property is 1500 Howard Avenue. That property is separated, or it's a separate parcel from the 1425 Baker Park Road property. But the two buildings are connected, and so even though there's a dividing line down the middle, the two properties, as you can see from the image, are connected. And so the applicant is seeking approval for this building to redo a portion of that building that's on the 1500 property. These units, these 8 retail units, are located on the 1425 on the other side. Both of the properties are zone mixed use gateway. They're both guided by the city's comprehensive plan as mixed use. The subject property, the one we're talking about, is 3.2 acres as it currently sits. So the applicants approached the city about the possibility of redeveloping a portion of this space several months ago, and then recently, before the holidays, came forward with a full application to propose the redevelopment of approximately 8,000 square feet of the almost 16,000 square foot building. So you can see the MPFC building outline comes all the way to here. What they're proposing to develop is the western, not quite, a little bit more than half, I guess, portion of that space. With that, they're proposing to redevelop that space into a brew pub that would allow for what they're proposing to be 187 seats. It would have a bar area, bathrooms, a brewery, a small office area, and then a small little stage area associated with that. It would also have a smaller, I call it a smaller outdoor seating area. One thing that's unique about what's being proposed in front of the city tonight is that typically when we're looking at something like this, we'd be looking at in the entire site as it relates to redevelopment of the site. The way that the city approved the Elam project last year, we did it so that there would be a new east-west road constructed on or through this property. And as a part of that new east-west road, if I can get to the slide, this site would then be separated. And there were certain required improvements that are shown within the right-of-way, the new right-of-way for this new east-west road, that would be the responsibility of the property owner and not the responsibility of the building tenant in this particular case. We are still working out several of the details relating to this part of the plan. The general plan that you see here tonight is the plan that we're moving off of, but we're still working on landscaping, lighting associated with this plan. And then that also includes the restriping of the existing parking lot that would be to the south of that. So it's a little bit disjointed in that regard, in that we've got two different parties that are responsible for making improvements in this particular case. And so the applicant that's in front of us tonight is really responsible from the front of the building into the building and not out into the improved parts. One of the things that we offered in the staff report is a condition that the approval, any approval would be subject to those improvements being completed by the owner of the property. We've had those similar discussions with both groups, so that we're on the same page, but we are still working on the plans relating to the road piece and the right-of-way piece for the new east-west road. But I'll go through the rest of the proposal as it's being proposed.
Mark,
Or do you have a
Mark,
question?
just clarify that, so the applicant is Todd Marley, not Todd and the owner of.
Todd is the owner of the brewery, or will be the owner of the brewery, and so he'll be the tenant in that space, and he's,
He's the sole applicant, or is it a co-applicant situation?
well, I don't know how they did the application, but you have the owner who has to sign the application just saying that they're approving the application, and so that's what, and they're here tonight as well. But, so it's, the applicant that we're dealing with is really from the brewery and wanting to get approval to go into that space, redo that space, and then the land use piece of that. Then we have the Elam plans, which included this east-west road, which have already been approved, but we're still working on a couple of details with the owner that we don't have relating to the landscaping, lighting, and then restriping of that existing parking lot. So those are separate pieces, but they coincide only from the standpoint that the parking is required for the use, and so it gets a little bit muddier.
Yeah, in my view, there is some overlap there, and so bear with me if I
Yeah,
have some comments about the site work as well as the use.
and I think that's fair. So as it relates to the use, as we talked about converting this space into the brewery tap room, the applicants provided us with an interior plan, but also shows the exterior kind of glazing or window treatments that would be added to the front of this building, as well as the plan profile of the outdoor patio, but then also gives a breakdown of the various spaces. You can see from this floor plan, essentially, there'd be a large area in the backside of this building, probably about half of that space, that would be for the brewery, some office space associated with that. Then kind of the public space would include tables and chairs eating area, a small stage area in the back of that building, a large bar in the center, more eating areas around the bar, some restrooms on the east side, and then on the west side, on the outside, there would be an access to an outdoor patio.
Mark, the one spot's the kitchen.
Oh, I'm sorry, yeah, I said brewery here, this was
Yeah.
kitchen.
Yeah.
This is the brewery on the backside. Thanks. So that's the space that's being proposed. Within that space, the applicant put together a breakdown of the number of seats, and I'll talk about seats as it relates to parking a little bit as we go through. The applicant's proposing to refinish and resurface the exterior of the building and add new windows and doors that would look something like this. So they've provided the city with a more detailed plan that shows the materials, the color scheme, and the various improvements that would be made to the front of the building. They also show what that outdoor structure would look like for the pergola and the outdoor seating area. And then they provided the city with some additional renderings showing the proposed changes to the front, as well as the proposed changes to the outside exterior space to accommodate the seating area. So everybody had these in their packet, but I'll just flip through them quick. You can see or get a good sense of what that space starts to look like. Not sure why those were smaller. The applicant also provided some information relating to signage, noting that signage is going to come through as a separate package for this application, but they do show a sign package that I believe meets the requirements of the city. One thing to note on this, which is kind of cool because we haven't seen anybody do this, but we've had some sign discussions. They are using exterior, not internal illuminated signage, which is compliant with our standards. And they did it in a really, I think, cool
Yeah.
manner. But you can see what could be done using some of the kind of overhead projected down light on to the building facade. So the applicants provide the city with the exterior elevations as well as the interior footprint. We have criteria for granting conditional use permit within the ordinance, essentially that the conditional use will not be, I think our word is injurious or take away from reasonable use and enjoyment of surrounding properties. When you look at this site, it was used as a grocery store. It was pretty heavy traffic flow day to day when it was being used for that. There's the commercial retail center to the east of this, which also has day-to-day flow, as well as one other existing restaurant. One of the things I think about with the brewing company is that it's likely their peak hours are going to be not during the daytime hours, and would be an evening hour, which would be offset, an offset of what's existing in that retail shopping center. But also not dissimilar to the use that was there as a grocery store. That's their peak hours were typically later hours, not earlier daytime hours. So from a standpoint of use and just traffic and things of that nature, I think it would have a similar type intensity to it. The other thing we look at is traffic parking associated with that, and that this won't have an impact on an existing system. The city adding the east-west road is an attempt to connect Howard and 29. I think it's actually going to help traffic in this area because it's going to provide for a needed cut through, so that traffic doesn't go up to Main and or have to go up to Main and around to get out. So it's going to provide an opportunity to get out to 29 and vice versa from 29 using the stoplight into this site. So when the city set that east-west road up, it was the intent that we would improve this overall commercial gateway area for accommodating heavier intensity uses, such as what would be proposed. Within the conditional use permit, we also do the site plan review. The city went through and did a more detailed review relating to the site plan. A couple of notes on that. I already talked about the fact that there's a little bit of discrepancy is not the right word, but there's two pieces that are working kind of hand in hand here. One is the parking lot and east-west road improvement, then the associated sidewalk, landscaping, lighting that goes with that. And then the other is the brewery and the building improvements that are being proposed, and those are two different entities that are working on those. So because of that, like we talked about, there's a little bit of a blur between those lines. But within that, one of the things we looked at is downtown design guidelines as it relates to building architecture. When you have an existing building, being able to 100% comply with all architectural standards is sometimes difficult because you're using an existing building, and that building was built prior to the adoption of those standards. As it relates to the added windows, door fronts and doors, and then building materials that are associated with the proposed use, I believe that they're compliant with the intent of the downtown, or of the architectural design standards, and probably bring this building closer than just about any building we have in the city to meeting those. As it relates to some of the 3 sides or 4 sides of that building, they're not doing anything to the backside, or they're not doing a whole lot to the entirety of the west side. And because of that, some of the openings and things wouldn't be necessarily compliant.
Well, one of the things that, there's a good picture.
In here, another
No,
one?
go back to the one that was there.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay, when you said, okay, your business starts, kind of like at the door and goes. So that lovely, like the cement and the flowers and, grasses and things like that, whose is that? And how does that fit in with a road that's literally so close to the building? Or this was just a visual?
No, so this is the plan. So the renderings show what was proposed on the road plans as it relates to the sidewalk and the parking.
Okay.
The landscaping is something that was not shown on those plans, and that's something that we're working on, who's putting in this portion of the improvements,
Okay, so that would be the owner versus the tenant.
potentially. It might be both, or it might be the tenant. I don't know how we're gonna get that done, but that is one of the areas where we don't have kind of finalized plans.
Okay.
But that space that you see there carved out for the landscaping
Yes.
coincides with this plan that, let me see if I can. It coincides with this plan. So just for an example, that landscaping we saw in the picture is this bed right here.
Okay.
And those are the 2 parking spaces, and this would be the new sidewalk that you'd see in front of the building, and the front door to the brewery would be right here.
Okay.
So you can see that from this line right here towards the south is all part of that new right-of-way section that's gonna be constructed as a part of the Elam
Okay.
redevelopment.
Are those parking, is that handicapped accessible? Is
It-
that why they're there? I
it's
had
like-
thought that there was going to be parking right by the building.
There's those couple of spaces parking in front of the new MPFC. These are two new spaces being added. And then in front of the retail mall, these are all being added to the
Okay.
front of that space.
Okay.
And that was part of the Elam approved plan set.
Okay,
Well, going back to that, I know, I'm not sure what happened at the council meeting, but, I know at planning commission raised some concerns about the parking in front, or the angle parking in front, and whether that, whole design there could be, more pedestrian friendly. So actually eliminate the parking in front of the buildings and have that be, you know, pedestrian space, whether it be, places for, you know, for planting areas, sitting areas for perhaps other businesses that may want to have some outdoor seating, some street trees, you know, more of a kind of a downtown streetscape kind of feel, rather than striping a road through a parking lot, and extending the sidewalks only. To me, with the size of the parking lot that we've got to the south, that I'm not sure those are really that necessary in terms of the counts. You can confirm or deny that, but.
Yeah,
um,
I'll go through it because I did a little more analysis on it.
Yeah, but just aesthetically and just in terms of the nature and feel of the whole area, personally, what I was looking for and what I expressed at the planning commission meeting was it would be more in line with what we talked about in downtown area as far as planting areas, sitting areas, pedestrian friendly, maybe some decorative pavement of some sort. And besides the fact that the angled parking really only serves cars from one direction and not the other, and there probably some room for perpendicular parking if you were to do it there. But it seems to be plenty of parking spaces to the main lot.
So I can address it a little bit. I mean, ultimately, council approved this plan, and we did bring all the planning commission comments. But if you look at this plan, I think it does do some of what the planning commission had pushed for. So, for example, we got the islands added in along the south part of that road for separation of the parking, and then also landscaping that could be provided and/or lighting as a part of the road streetscape improvements. This concrete sidewalk that's being added in front of that will widen the sidewalk there out to about 15 feet in width, which is actually more in line with our downtown kind of design standard. So it's going to take it from about 8 to about 15, which is a big improvement. And then they did add in a couple of landscape areas along that, but still trying to maximize parking in front of the tenant spaces. And then this area here would serve like our existing restaurant here for outdoor seating. It's possible that then you'd have a space right here that would be suitable for kind of some tables or patio. But that just bringing that sidewalk out, adding or extending the sidewalk by another 7 feet is going to be, I think, pretty significant improvement to the front of those spaces versus what's there right now.
I agree that additional space will help. Although you'll have it be, you know, half old concrete, half new concrete. Spaces might be sufficient, but in terms of the other amenities, you know, except for the 2 or 3 planting areas, there's really nothing else in that area. And especially the 2 on the end in front of the brewery, really seem to be, you know, especially as I see it kind of next to the elevations here. Not sure how the applicant feels about it, but they seem kind of unnecessary and kind of intrusive. Imagine looking at these nice elevations that were rendered here and put a couple big old trucks right in front. You know, I mean, it's kind of ruins the look and the feel of the facade of the building. Besides potential traffic issues, someone backing out and someone turning in off of Howard right there too. There could be potential conflicts there as well. My other comment I would have too is on those 4-foot parking lot islands. you won't get anything to grow in in that 4 feet. You'll have a physical barrier, you can maybe get a little snow on there, but you will never get anything to grow in that 4 feet. So I would recommend those be larger if you wanted to have indeed something green and survive in such a harsh, small environment right there. Any other comments from?
I have a question about those 2 spots. Would those be ADA spots?
So they're looking at making, I believe, and I don't know,